more than 45,000 East and Gulf Coast dock workers walked off the job today for the first strike of its kind in more than 50 years. In a post on social media, the International Longshoremen's Association said that they were prepared to stay out on the picket line for whatever period of time it takes to have their demands met. To discuss further, I'm joined by Gene Seroka, who is the executive editor of the Port of Los Angeles. Gene, good to have you back on the program here with us. Of course, this is not new to you. You've also had to navigate your own port strikes over the years, a few years back, actually. So all of these things considered, what most notably do you think executives are working through at this time of the ports to make sure that they are getting back to the negotiating table and perhaps not showing their entire hand, but showing that they can be malleable to some of the requests made by the workers?
Brad, good morning and nice to see you again. This is a difficult time. We're on the doorstep of the retail holiday season. And since the last contract that the International Longshore Association signed back in 2019, the economic world has changed and these workers deserve to get paid. They also want provisions around their job security and other work rules. And maybe now we'll get a little bit more activity as the discussions have been kind of quiet over the past several months. Back here in Los Angeles, you may remember during the COVID surge, we had 109 ships backed up. Importers were using this port as a warehouse, buying just in case, no longer just in time. And then we went through a protracted labor negotiation of our own, but our dock workers stayed on the job the entire time. There was no walkout, no pickets. Yet here we've learned a tremendous amount, and so have the import-export community. Many have shifted fractional amounts of their cargo back west for over several months now because they knew that this could become a sticking point in these labor discussions. Drought conditions in the Panama Canal and security concerns in the Red Sea all made traveling to the East Coast a little bit questionable. So folks wanted to hedge in case one of those issues became more pronounced.
And so, you know, as we were preparing for this segment in this conversation, even as we're taking a look at where some of these strikes for dock workers are taking place, we have to remind viewers, in 2016, the terminal in Los Angeles, the Trepac terminal in Los Angeles, the first U.S. port to really automate here. What went into those discussions? And we ultimately know what netted out as well in terms of the revenue sharing that was able to come to some agreement around. So how do you think some of the findings there can also be applied to the negotiations here on the East Coast and in the Gulf Coast?
Well, for our viewers today, Brad, two separate unions, two separate contracts. The International Longshore and Warehouse Union, representing 29 ports on the west coast of the United States, has another 5 years left on their collective bargaining agreement. Way back in 2008, technology and this automation or robotics of port terminals was negotiated into a contract, and it's seen mixed results. In some cases, cutting many jobs up to 80%. In others, an expansion of capacity while not impacting jobs. And what we've learned from this is there's got to be very detailed discussions on each project between the Employers Association and labor to make sure that impacts to the jobs, the ports, and the economy are all front and center. On the East Coast, what we're hearing through media reports is that automation is an absolutely full stop, non-negotiable item. And that needs to be taken into account these discussions as well. 2/3 of America's population revolves around these ports on the East and Gulf Coasts.
Do you think that's realistic, though, for East Coast workers who are demanding this full ban on automation?
Of the 360 ports worldwide that are observed by media, industry experts, and others, only 5% have deployed robotics. We're a little bit more densified here in Southern California, but by and large, this discussion of robotics has to come with job commitments. We've seen it in Hamburg, where the CTA terminal has been able to deploy robotics, increase capacity, and also add jobs. So these worker conditions, job commitments, health and safety, all have to be part of these discussions.
What is the timeline that you would be tracking here, Gene, that you imagine both sides that are negotiating are really keeping in mind as they are going throughout these discussions?
Well, it's certainly unique because this particular union has not put up picket signs since 1977. There's been labor commitments throughout as well as private sector ones. At this time, we have to look at two things. Number one, there's not going to be an immediate impact to the economy. Many retailers, manufacturers, and others have shifted gateways, pulled forward inventories, and prepared for a situation just like this. Now, if it goes for weeks or months, that's a very different discussion that we'll revisit in the coming days. But we'll also have to look at port and traffic congestion. For every day out on the job, it probably takes about a week to clean up that backlog, but it is manageable. And those billions of dollars of economic value that some have talked about are not lost forever. We can play catch up, but there will be a degree of difficulty in that as well. And I would like to correct one thing that the last guest said. We have not had any East or Gulf Coast ships divert to the West Coast of the United States. That is sacrosanct between these unions. What we have seen is cargo being booked in Asia a little bit earlier and coming our way as opposed to going on traditional vessels to the East and Gulf Coasts, again, as a hedge. But no ships are making that left-hand turn away from their normal routes to come here to Los Angeles.
All right, Port of Los Angeles Executive Director Gene Seroka joining us here today. Gene, thanks so much for taking the time.